Welcome to Villains Too Stupid to Win. It's time to get nostalgic for the glorious age of peak Arnold. Today we're looking at Vilos Cohaagen from Total Recall 1990. It's another ultra-violent dystopian Verhoeven nightmare, delivering equal doses of brains and brawn and jam-packed with all the tasty one-liners you can handle. Based on a short story by Philip K. Dick, it's a movie that mired in development hell for years, but miraculously didn't end up a total train wreck.
We hope you enjoyed the ride!
Featuring an all-star cast of epic sci-fi alumni, some of whom we've already roasted in previous episodes. From Starship Troopers, we've got Dean Norris, Marshall Bell, and of course Michael Ironside, showing us how he became an amputee. There's also a few Trekkies around. Robert Picardo, better known as the Doctor from Voyager, playing the creepy Johnny Cab robot, who in this role seems to have been typecast as AI characters. We've even got Mark Alaimo, who would go on to play the arch-egotist himself, Ducat.
They're all connected!
And from what little we see, the guy was already a raging lunatic. And last but not least, it's villainous royalty Ronnie Cox, who we last saw being a dick in RoboCop. Unsurprisingly, yet again, he's playing another insufferable corporate douchebag, Vilos Cohaagen. In the year 2084, in the midst of a war between the apparent superstates of the northern and southern blocks, the North has somehow found time in between battles to colonize Mars, and allowed it to turn into an authoritarian nightmare mining world. Not that things on Earth are that much better. Governed with apparent autonomy by our corporate overlord Cohaagen, Mars is ruled with an iron fist. But aside from their mining income, this colony is weirdly all about tourism dollars. Because what better place for a holiday than an active war zone? We follow Douglas Quaid, an unreasonably buff everyman with a strange foreign accent.
Give this people air.
Who, growing sick of his humdrum life of constant sex with his smoking hot wife, longs for an adventure on desolate, dangerous Mars, inspired by a recurring wet dream he keeps having of some other random woman, which he stupidly overshares with his spouse every morning. So naturally, the most logical course of action is to risk his brain on a phony Mars holiday created by a memory implant at a disreputable business called Recall, despite a warning from his workmate.
A friend of mine tried one of their special offers, nearly got himself lobotomized.
And annoyingly for me, from this point on, the most obvious way to interpret the remainder of the movie is as a schizoid embolism-induced fever dream. The second Quaid KOs at Recall, his brain spirals uncontrollably into fantasy, governed by Recall's secret agent parameters and drawing from Quaid's dreams and desires to create an appealing and personalized narrative. It's a situation that will inevitably result in Quaid's lobotomization. It also means that almost the entirety of Total Recall is completely immune to inconsistencies and plot holes, and it obviously makes the version of Cohaagen we see a new level of fictitious. But don't worry people, luckily I have experience weaseling my way around such things. In this video series we pick apart stupid fictional villains. The only difference this time is the writers, so to speak, are Quaid's mind and the idiots at Recall. And if that's not enough, we also see Cohaagen briefly before Quaid's visit to Recall, and he seems every bit the dick we come to know more intimately later on. So in other words, bombs away.
See you at the party, Richter.
Point 1. Cohaagen's unnecessarily convoluted plan was doomed to fail from the beginning. So Cohaagen has himself a bit of a rebellion on Mars, but rather than using more realistic methods to deal with it, he instead cooks up a harebrained scheme to mind-wipe his buddy Hauser and use him to infiltrate the rebels, with the hope that this vacant secret agent will be able to slip past the psychic abilities of the mutants, which immediately to me creates the inherent risk of a more benevolent personality emerging, someone who might actively work against Cohaagen using the very skills that were meant to be used against his enemies. He then dumps this new Douglas Quaid NPC on Earth of all places, far from the rebels and the relevant mission targets. Seemingly his plan was then to use a company man to lure Quaid to Mars, but then he also has some trigger happy henchmen babysitting Quaid in case something goes awry, which they mistakenly believe occurs when Quaid visits Recall. Richter and his crew make the incorrect assumption that Quaid was reactivated as Hauser and or possibly spilled some beans, and they decided of their own accord that Quaid needed taking out. So much for the chain of command.
Figuring things out for yourself is the only freedom anyone really has.
But why on earth would anyone think their agent returning to his right mind would be any kind of threat? If he's a threat, then so are they. What could Quaid or Hauser even know that could be so bad? Maybe something about the alien tech, but Quaid never had any proof, and Cohaagen has already been bullshitting his way around those rumors. Not to mention, he can already get away with blatantly gunning down surrendering rebels on TV. So in reality, there should be nothing so serious to worry about that you need to start flinging bullets around in public. It's creating an incident in itself. Quaid never said anything specific or incriminating.
You blew my cover! They'll be here any minute. They killed you all!
And the technicians wiped all of his memories from the recall visit, meaning he was back to being Douglas Quaid. Whatever that means. These cowboys don't even bother to check Quaid's status, though he is making it patently obvious he's still who he's meant to be. His wife, now reimagined as a Cohaagen plant, doesn't bother with much small talk either, deferring to Richter's strategy. She then delivers some big pieces of the puzzle straight to Quaid.
They erased your identity and implanted a new one. I was written in as your wife so that I could watch you and make sure the erasure took.
The only way to explain this course of events in a more forgiving light is that Cohaagen was happy to let his henchmen chase Quaid as a means of further reinforcing the rebel narrative and hurry him along to Mars. It's also plausible that Hauser did actually side with the rebellion at some point, and thus all of this is not only a futile attempt to infiltrate the rebellion a second time, but to eventually restore an earlier Hauser who would still consider himself Cohaagen's friend. It would almost be sweet if it wasn't so pathetic and such a massive waste of resources. It would then be logical to hide these truths from Quaid and or Hauser, so not everything Cohaagen says is to be believed.
You know you're lying. Hauser turned against you.
That's what we wanted you to think.
Though parts of Cohaagen's convoluted scheme are open to interpretation, I'm gonna go ahead and get him for everything that falls under his responsibility and everything he directly claimed credit for.
Benny here.
My pleasure, man.
Guy with the suitcase, the mask, the money, the message from Hauser.
First, the obvious one. Cohaagen's two apparent schemes on Earth openly interfere with each other, especially damning when you consider he should be more than familiar with how Richter and his crew operate. They're far more liable to actually stop Quaid from reaching Mars, and thus any purpose their presence might have served is quickly gone. And all of it seems like massive overkill when you've got the guy implanted with a tracker, which Cohaagen may have helped him remove. The case that Cohaagen claims to have sent Quaid had everything he needed to get to Mars and then some, including a hologram seemingly designed to create a diversion, most useful in a combat situation, and a disguise that blows up for no reason. Both of these items end up assisting Quaid immensely against Cohaagen's forces. He apparently couldn't even be bothered arranging a smooth transit through customs for him, the only obvious excuse here being that it was indeed a rebel Hauser who sent the case to himself, and Cohaagen's claim that he did was just an attempt to convince Hauser he had always been a corporate lackey. But then again, one conversation between just Cohaagen and Richter backs up the idea that the case was Cohaagen's doing.
He had help from our side, sir.
I know that.
But I
Who
thought...
told you to think?
Regardless, once everyone is running around in a bullet storm on Mars, Cohaagen still seems to have two concurrent plans that run the risk of interfering with each other. He's got his regular goons on the prowl, but he's also got mutant traitor Benny joining Quaid for his journey to meet the rebel leadership. But the trouble is, Richter is running around crazed with bloodlust just around the time Benny is ingratiating himself with Quaid.
A non-emotional response would be more useful.
Even if Cohaagen wanted Richter to chase Quaid into Venusville and into the arms of the rebels, he seems to have kept Richter and his goons completely in the dark.
But they've got Quaid, they're protecting him.
Perfect. Get out of Sector G, now. Don't think. Do it.
So naturally, they've been trying to kill Quaid and anyone they deem a rebel. He's lucky Quaid and Benny made it anywhere. And surprise, surprise, Cohaagen's meta plan ends up being ultimately pointless. He does manage to almost completely wipe out the rebels, but it turns out rebel leader Quato could see through the mind wipes all along. Just don't ask why Hauser's supposed memories have him flying around like a spectre. Well, I mean, we know why. So all things said and done, there was absolutely no need for Cohaagen to risk his buddy Hauser on this endeavor. He simply needed a temporary plant to identify the rebel leadership before taking them out in short order. I'm sure Benny or pretty much anyone could have pulled this off. And although Quato and co may be dead, the Rebellion 2.0 is born in the form of Super Agent Quaid. Now with all the intel and motivation he needs to really hit Cohaagen where it hurts. Cohaagen's elaborate deception always had far too many risk factors to ever be a viable way to manage the rebellion.
You must be asking yourself, what if this doesn't work?
It's a strategy that seems far more likely to end with Cohaagen's death, and his chances don't exactly improve once we take a closer look at the caliber of his men. Point 2. Cohaagen's henchmen are incompetent loose cannons, and his erratic leadership compounds their performance issues. As is probably already clear by now, this Richter fella and his motley crew aren't exactly the most level-headed of henchmen.
Naked force has resolved more issues throughout history than any other factor.
It is possible that their murderous intent was partially driven by their knowledge that Hauser had previously joined the rebellion.
You should have killed Quaid on Mars.
But even then, their response is ultimately pointless and apparently against standing orders.
If I wanted him dead, you moron, I wouldn't have dumped him on Earth. I want Quaid delivered alive for reimplantation. Have you got that?
So now, with explicit orders, Richter and Cohaagen have no excuse. Even if we find a way to interpret their initial actions in a more favorable light, the more solid criticisms start from here on out. Because this Richter guy is about as unhinged as they come, and his pack of insolent jerks aren't much better.
As you can see, everyone seemed perfectly willing to go along with this breach of orders.
Ignoring Cohaagen's orders completely, these guys start running down the streets shooting at Quaid indiscriminately. They've even left behind a perfectly good car, and they sure don't seem to be in much of a rush. Richter and his goons spend the rest of the movie relentlessly gunning for Quaid, spraying bullets recklessly around almost every time they see him. Luckily for Quaid, all of these guys, including the cannon fodder, are extremely inaccurate marksmen with sluggish reaction times, kitted out with weaponry poorly suited to their operational environment. It's all spray and pray. There isn't a controlled burst to be found around here. They're even idiotically opening fire with their comrades directly in the line of sight, and if you think their hand-to-hand combat skills are any better, you'd be wrong. Quaid, Melina, Laurie, and this lady are probably the most proficient warriors to be found around here, and 3 out of 4 of them are working for the good guys. I'm starting to wonder how any of these grunts got their jobs. Quaid and Melina alone wiped out an entire squad of these dudes with a simple hologram ruse. If anyone takes the incompetence cake though, naturally it has to be Richter. His recklessness most obvious in its consistent habit of firing at Quaid with only fragile glass separating everyone from the near vacuum of Mars. This borderline psychotic is just the absolute worst pick as mission leader. Richter's motivations should especially be of concern, since Cohaagen badly emasculated the guy when he put his girlfriend on the front line to be continuously boinked by a beefcake.
No, I'm sure she hated every minute of it.
If this dude ever had any respect for Cohaagen, it's most probably gone by now. His jealousy of Quaid and Laurie's eventual death at his hands serves as Richter's most obvious motivations for wanting Quaid dead, but he may also resent Hauser's special position within Cohaagen's organization. So Richter has been highly motivated in numerous ways to kill Quaid as soon as possible, and he's now in the perfect position to do so while framing it as an operational necessity. This is the last guy you want anywhere near your buddy or your fragile scheme. Cohaagen tries and fails to correct Richter several times along the way, but commands are in one ear, out the other with this guy.
First you try and kill Quaid, and then you let him get away.
At no point does Cohaagen meaningfully rein him in when all he had to do was bench the guy for a while and put someone else in charge. Or, perish the thought, he could assume command of the operation directly. This is currently his most pressing endeavor after all. All in all, Cohaagen is a distant leader who intentionally withholds vital information while also over-delegating, relying completely on his reckless, insubordinate lackeys to take care of the details, which they're being capable of doing even if they were competent, because their actual objective is left obscured.
I don't give you enough information to think.
It's safe to say Cohaagen has quite the spread of leadership inadequacies. At the very least, Richter needed a performance review, but instead Cohaagen just gives him a final bollocking without even bothering to look him in the eye.
Richter goes hog wild, screwing up everything I spent a year planning. Frankly, I'm amazed it worked.
Meanwhile, he focuses on toying with the peasants. It's no wonder things turn to shit around here.
It's an instinctive need to establish a dominant position in any social gathering.
Richter ultimately has things turn his way though when Cohaagen finally resolves to kill Quaid after his buddy Hauser restore point fails, which doesn't come as much of a surprise since everyone left this dangerous agent alone with a few scrawny technicians. Not that a couple of guards down the hall will make much difference. And so Quaid's off for a final battle at the alien megastructure, and on the way we discover he has a very strange method of RSVPing to parties. But hey, let's be honest, it's not like Richter's arms were doing him much good anyway. Good old reckless Richter, we have to give him credit for one thing.
I say we throw the switch and see what happens.
If his boss wasn't on the scene, he would have flicked the alien switch just for shits and giggles, doing everyone a massive favor, including Cohaagen, though he would never see it that way. Point 3. Cohaagen started a war against his own people, choosing to rule over a stunted, war-torn colony when he could have taken advantage of an entire world. So this Cohaagen guy didn't start off with good intentions before slowly morphing into a profit-obsessed corporate dictator. No, he treated his workers with utter contempt from the very beginning.
They worked themselves to death, but Cohaagen ended up with all the money.
Building cheap, malfunctioning domes for the original mine workers, he worked many of them to death. And for those unlucky enough to survive, their offspring ended up suffering hideous mutations. And so Cohaagen inadvertently created a race of superpowered enemies he'd have to deal with forever.
You're getting off to an early start.
And are we sure it's just the peasants getting the bad domes? Because most of the exterior of this colony seems to be built of highly smashable glass. Considering how easily this stuff shatters, I'm shocked it's able to withstand the temperature fluctuations and pressure differential created by the Martian atmosphere, or lack thereof. Does Cohaagen remember that he has to live here too? And when the shit hits the fan, or the bullets hit the glass to be more precise, there's no automatic emergency containment system either. No, you gotta drag and possibly fight your way to a big red button. When the oxygen isn't pissing out into the Martian atmosphere during firefights, Cohaagen tightly controls the air supply to each district, often shutting off the tap if the locals don't play ball. He also appears to crack down on a regular basis. Cohaagen has essentially forced the population into rebellion and escalated the series of conflicts into a full-scale war.
The situation may be characterized as tense.
With all this unadulterated chaos in an environment that was already volatile before anyone fired a shot, how much longer does Cohaagen think this place is gonna last?
2 weeks.
And although Cohaagen may tightly control most aspects of life on the colony, he sure isn't putting much effort into border security, because the rebels have themselves quite the array of firearms. Once Cohaagen discovers the alien megastructure within the mines, he decides to keep this profound discovery from humanity in the name of making money. He also won't entertain the thought of switching the thing on. Aside from its basic function, there are certainly questions surrounding this alien machine that would warrant further study, such as, why would the aliens go to all the effort of building this machine but then fail to activate it? And how exactly does Mars retain its new atmosphere without a functional magnetosphere? Does the machine generate that too? And did the aliens go extinct, or did they leave after realizing too late that Mars isn't the best terraforming prospect? I'm not sure if Cohaagen's yes-men scientists were giving him an accurate interpretation of their findings or merely telling him what he wants to hear.
We can't risk it. The chain reaction could spread to all the turbinium in the planet. That means meltdown. A meltdown on a planetary scale.
But with his resources, I'm sure he could have gotten to the bottom of the matter either way. Instead, he chooses to believe that the machine will cause a global meltdown because it was politically convenient for him to do so. We can't have that thing using up all that precious turbinium ore and ending his monopoly on oxygen. There's no doubt that a breathable Martian atmosphere will create numerous challenges for Cohaagen. The loss of his colony, his business empire, and probably the support he receives from the Northern Bloc on Earth.
As long as the turbinium keeps flowing, I can do anything I want.
But this dude is already obscenely rich and powerful, and he's obviously not interested in philanthropy or bettering the world, so the only thing left for the guy is more power, money, and influence. Yet Cohaagen is still thinking so small.
Open your mind.
By not flicking the switch, he's just deprived himself of massive economic opportunities. It's time he put on his big boy pants and branched out on his own. Forget about your stunted little slave colony where economic growth is painfully difficult and slow. Cohaagen could have had an entire world ripe for exploitation.
More money, more freedom, more air.
Flush with cash and resources, and with a military force at his command, he was in the prime position to snatch up the lion's share of real estate. Imagine the new and improved tourism tourism empire he could have built. And there must be other minerals around here aside from turbinium. He'd obviously need to somehow get the locals on board and declare independence, but with a breathable atmosphere, the support required from Earth should be far less than before. And if he really wanted to rock the boat, he could switch loyalties and ask for support and recognition from the Southern Bloc.
We must find a way to contact our friends.
After all, the Northern Bloc's war effort relies completely on the flow of turbinium.
Consider that a divorce.
With it gone, they probably won't be able to put up much of a fight against the South, let alone invade Mars in retribution. But instead, Cohaagen decides he'd rather continue with the status quo. So logically, having no intention of ever switching the alien machine on, he at the very least disables or destroys the control console, right? Nah, he left it completely as is where is. He didn't even bother to put a tarp over the damn thing. And it seems he could have destroyed it with an explosive at any time. This extraordinary laziness becomes even more damning when you factor in that rumors of the alien ruins are spreading like wildfire, and the only thing separating the mining operation from the alien megastructure is a thin rock wall. So with Quaid on the cusp of victory, Cohaagen turns up at the last possible second to finally disable the control console.
I'll blow this place up and be home in time for cornflakes.
And I must say, I am impressed he at least had the courage to sort this out personally, but I'm still confused, because he had already abandoned the idea of getting Hauser back, yet he stuck around here rather than just blowing Quaid up or shooting him as he approaches. And Cohaagen seems more than willing to kill himself rather than let his people have free air. I'm really not seeing how that could be profitable. And so Cohaagen suffers an ironic and grisly death after being explosively decompressed on the surface of Mars, just a minute short of the air he so desperately needed. Though he may have mostly wiped out the rebels, it came at the expense of his BFF and literally everything else he has.
Sue me, dickhead.
And come on Cohaagen, can we honestly claim the rebels are completely wiped out when this one is still alive? So after all that bloodshed, we surprisingly get a tidy happy ending. Or not so happy as it turns out. Enjoy the lobotomy, Quaid. But I guess I shouldn't end things without again addressing the elephant in the video.
You get the girl, kill the bad guys, and save the entire planet.
Yes, if we wanted to be nice, we could excuse all of Cohaagen's shortcomings by acknowledging that Quaid simply imagined himself some reckless, incompetent bad guys to plow his way through. But what fun would that be? So now all that's left is to consider whether I dare take a look at the other Cohaagen. And this time, he won't have an added layer of narrative to hide behind. At least, I don't think he does he?
You're nothing! You're nobody! You're a stupid dream.
I suppose since we roasted the original, that would only be fair. Or perhaps it's best that this time we pretend he doesn't exist at all.